Sue. And uh, the introduction today is just to say how incredible of a speaker we have with us today, not just for his brilliant mind, but for his, as we said before the call, uh, pretty looks. I think it's
Yeah,
really great. Yeah. Welcome, Hakeem.
Thank you, Miriam. It's good to see you again.
Likewise,
Yeah.
likewise. I'm very excited for this chat. And I
Yes,
wonder,
yes,
both of us have a real passion for the mysterious and the
yes.
unexpected. And so
Yeah.
there's no script today. We're just
Lovely,
gonna wing
lovely,
it.
lovely. That's my favorite format.
And so is that what you do with your courses as well? I'm just gonna jump in. Is that something that you embrace in your day-to-day as a scientist? I was gonna do an intro, but let's wing
Yes,
it
go
and move
for it.
that to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
later.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So, even when I do a talk or a speech, I never script anything, right? I just basically have talking points in my head. And if I make a PowerPoint or something along those lines, it's just a single image. And basically they serve to let me know where I am in the story. Because I really feel like the connection between the people is more important than the information, right? If I don't connect, you're not going to hear the information I provide. So if I'm disconnected from you because there's a script between the two of us, then it's not the experience that I'm trying to deliver.
You got it. And before we joined, Laurent was here from
Yes.
Web3, and we were just, riffing, as they say in music. How
Yeah.
do you see science and music? And I'm just jumping in
Right.
all over
Yeah.
the place,
Right.
partly because I have so many things I want to talk to you about. I'm
Right.
excited,
Yeah.
and I don't know where to start. So let's start with music.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was a musician throughout my childhood and through into my early adulthood, right? And then, the life gets busy. You got to live indoors and eat and earn money. So I haven't been musically engaged this century as much as I was last century, right? Um, but I feel that both music and science sort of speak to a fundamental nature of our humanity, right? In the sense that the curiosity that I was born with is not something that I decided one day, hey, I want to be curious about the world. It just happened. And in the very same way, when I was a kid in high school, I had a little niece. She's now about to turn 40, which is mind blowing. But I was one of these little kids, hip hop and rap were new. And I was always like beating out little beats. And she'd be there as an infant, unable to walk, and she'd be bobbing to the beat, right? So that spoke to me that there is some primitive
Mm,
nature. There's something fundamental about how we interface with rhythm and sound. And it's also fundamental, this curiosity about nature. And I don't, my good friend, Dr. Stefan Alexander, wrote a book a few years ago with the title The Jazz of Physics, because he is a jazz musician. All right. He's a
mhm,
saxophone player. Now, what's clever about that is long before he did the jazz of physics, people were doing the physics of jazz, the physics of music. And that's a pretty dry subject, right? The jazz of physics is much more interesting and easier to get than the physics of jazz. And so people do try to make a more direct connection between the two, but I
mhm.
feel like that is not necessary. But this fundamental, when we look at our fundamental nature of human beings, how we express what we feel within us, how that translates to action and thought, I see a deep similarity between the two.
Absolutely. And there's a resonance within our
Yes.
fields, and
Yeah.
let's bring in space. How does that tie
Yeah.
in?
Yeah. Well, it's a matter of perspective, right? So when I study space, when I began studying space in earnest, I was almost 30 years old, right? The first time I looked through a telescope, I was 26 years old. And if you look at, let's take it all the way back to Pythagoras, okay? So
Okay.
if you're sufficiently geeky, you know
Mhm,
about this phenomenon known as the harmony of the spheres. So
mhm,
Pythagoras is the person that introduced the musical scale to Europe. All right.
mhm,
So he invented the Pythagorean theorem. He invents
mhm,
the musical scale, but we don't know if he actually invented it, but he introduced it into Greece. But if you look at the way that people thought the universe was structured, they believed that the heavenly bodies were sort of like stuck to these crystalline spheres that surrounded
yeah,
Earth. And the
yeah.
number of spheres matched the number of notes in a major scale, right? So you have the sphere of the moon, the sphere of the sun, the sphere of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Boom, 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 boom. Then you're back to the fundamental note, boom, right? And it was said that Pythagoras was the only human who could hear the harmony of the spheres, that they would play this music, but because it's there every day of our lives, we never notice it. But Pythagoras, because he was so ultra dope, he could hear the harmony of the spheres, right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
that is the first connection, I think, that is known in history of this connection between space and music or art. But in today's world, what we actually are doing is we are taking, instead of taking our telescopes and looking at an interesting object, we have these telescopes that tile the night sky, right? So every night they go and they look at every region available of the sky, and they'll revisit the same location multiple times per night. And if you do this for 5-10 years, you now have a movie of the night sky, all right, where each image is a frame. And there are stars that change their brightness. There are some of them that pulsate, for example. And so once we get this data, like the last paper I published on this topic, it was 5 billion observations of 24 million objects. Wow. And you're not going to look at that with your naked eye, right? You have to use some sort of statistical analysis. But the first thing you want to do is classify the different types of objects into their particular categories. Well, guess what's the best categorization tool that we have? Our own ears and minds. So people have decided to what they call sonify those light curves of objects, right? So even though looking at it with eye, you can't tell, oh, this is an RR Lyrae, this is a Cepheid variable, this is a mirror valuable. If you turn it into sound and you let students listen, very quickly they can go through them and classify them, right? Yeah, so that's another connection.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just, as a fellow geek, I'd like to revisit Pythagoras because I'd like to go beyond before, pre-Greco-Roman. I think there was a lot of connection between celestial spheres and music and resonance. And even from, the wonders of the world, there's this resonance that, we see in seismic proportions from down below,
that's right.
Above. And so I wonder, in terms of, we have the pentatonic scale, we have other types of numerical, I guess, systems. What are your thoughts in terms of the metrics that we use? A bar has 4 beats and certain.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot that's similar. Like, for example, planets and stars ring like a bell. So on the sun, there's what is known as the 5-minute oscillation pattern. So the sun is ringing like a bell, right? Of course, there's no air between us and the sun to transmit the sound. But people have actually done that work of, here's the sounds of space. And what determines the note on a guitar string is the mass density of the string and the length of the string, right? So if I have an infinitely long string, I can have a wave of any wavelength.
Good. Yeah.
But the second I tie it down on each end, now it has a note. Well, the Earth has a particular size, right? It's a cavity. So only notes of a particular frequency can survive on that instrument that we call the planet Earth. So that seismic signal that you're listening to, right, is thinking about the Earth itself as a musical instrument.
Which is why I got so giddy, because it brings us to string theory and superstring theory and M theory and these strings that vibrate. And and I'll just trail off and let you take over.
That stuff is really good ideas in math that hasn't been shown yet to be the actual nature of nature or the actual nature of reality. But if you think about it, what we call particles, electrons, protons, photons, right? They are like musical notes. And what do I mean by that? If I hear a musical note, I give it a name. Oh, that's a C, right? Especially if you have perfect pitch, right? That's a G major, right? Or a G flat. But the note itself is not a real thing. What's real is the vibrations in the air. What's real are the vibrations of the musical instrument that vibrated the air, right? And so it's the exact same way with electrons and protons and these things. They are not the real thing. They're like notes. So here's one way to see that. One of the things you learn very quickly when you're doing physics classes is there's no experiment you can do to tell one electron from another, one proton from another. They are all identical. Well, musical notes are that way too. A C is a C is a C is a C, right? So that tells you that thing is not the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing is a thing that's vibrating. And so in the case of particles like electrons and protons, it is what we call quantum fields. So if you think of a three-dimensional string, right, and that quantum field has a particular resonance where it has energy in it, right? This packet of energy that is really, and when you look at the quantum mechanical description of these things, they're described like waves. So there's phrases like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It seems strange and spooky, but all waves obey that same principle in the sense of I can measure, I can localize the wave, but if I do, I lose information about the frequency, right? Because I'm looking at a small part of it, or I get the frequency really good, which means I listen to it for a long time, which makes me lose information about the exact location localizing a wave, right? So it's a trade-off one against the other. So fundamentally, everything is resonance. We are all like an orchestra, right? Because each particle that makes us up is a different note that's resonating in these quantum fields.
Absolutely. And, I find painting the same. It's a bit of an operatic symphony. And so you're composing these notes. What I wonder is when we look at, Flatland, you've heard of
Yeah.
Carl.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're describing here is the different perspectives. And when you lose information that you use this word obey. And I want to hone in on that.
Yeah.
What is being obeyed? Quantum gravity, quantum spin? Is it the unknown? Is it dark matter, dark energy? And this ties in really nicely to your realms that we've spoken about in the
Right.
past. I'd love
Yeah.
to hear a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. So the realms that we're referring to is the fact that in the universe, size matters. Okay. And the nature of reality changes fundamentally based on what realm you're in. So the quantum realm and the cosmological realm are completely different from the realm in which we exist. So if you take the ideas that we have and apply them there, you can't explain what you observe. So you have to really shift to understand how, you mentioned this symphony, right? Well, if you think about food, it's very similar. If you're a very good chef, your food is not a single note. It's not a single instrument. It's a symphony of textures and tastes. You have the sweets and the salties and the bitters and the bagaong. So that's a Filipino joke for anybody who it's fermented shrimp paste.
Love it.
So the point is that the particles that make us up, the true nature of our reality, they're all symphonies, and one builds on the other, right? So when you're looking at the quantum realm, the manifestations that you hear about of space-time, gravity, and all that, you can pretty much ignore it. It doesn't really exist at that level. If you look at the interaction of two electrons, you don't think of them as being gravitationally attracted or repulsed from each other, right? You think about their electrical interaction, right? And so just as we have different elements of voices, we have different voices in an orchestra, right, that come together to make this sound that emerges as some great work of art. In the same way, everything that manifests around us is an orchestra of quantum fields that are all imbued with energy and are vibrating, and each quantum field is like a different voice. If you think about it that way, right? The electron field, the quark fields, the electromagnetic fields, each one is like a different voice in this orchestra that we call reality.
It's like a cacophony of fields.
Well, the cacophony, the noise right? Noise, the thing about noise is that it doesn't exist. It subtracts from itself. But where there is resonance, they add and you get reality coming out. And that reality
Whoa.
has an
Yeah.
emergent property. Like, for example, music has emotion in it. It is sound, but yet that sound is emotion emerges from that sound. And so when you're studying music, right, you're doing musical theory, you're like, oh yeah, dome, this minor note is sad. Boom, this major note is happy, right? Or this is bright. Yeah, so all of these things are, the same language of art is the same language of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And but how you see that is not something that we're taught generally, right?
Yes.
And that's what I'm hoping to express.
That's incredible. And I wonder, is this some of the things that are these some of the things that you teach in your new course at MIT?
No, it's
What you
not
do?
MIT. It's at George Mason. I'm
Oh,
sitting
I'm
in my
sorry.
hotel. Right now,
George
I'm sitting
Mason.
at
Yeah.
Princeton University. So I have two appointments. One
Okay.
is at George Mason University, where I teach, and Princeton, where I'm researching. I'm a part of a satellite team. Okay.
Right.
And I work on the research component and the communications component. And so I do absolutely, if I'm trying to remember what I said, when I'm trying to communicate, the first thing I want to do is connect. And there are a
Yes.
lot of people that the second you write any mathematics, they're breaking the connection. I'm out of here, right? Time to go to sleep. So
Totally.
how do you reach people?
Yeah.
You reach them where they are, and you reach them through anecdote and story, and which is another form of art.
Absolutely. I'm just recovering from my MIT flub here because I did do my research and due diligence as
And,
an interviewer, and I
well,
could have sworn I saw it.
what
Did you give a
happened is
lecture? Yeah.
I gave the commencement speech
I see. Okay,
about 3
there
weeks
we go.
ago
That
for
I
the
could have sworn.
College of
Okay, all right.
Science. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm only slightly crazy then. All right. So
Uh,
in that in that commencement speech,
it's
and
all
I think
relative.
what you imbue in all of your interactions, and I watched your videos, I've read your book, and we've, had a number of chats, is this sense of joy. There's an innate sense of joy,
Yeah.
and there's an innate sense of humor and levity.
Yeah.
And that I think is magnetic. And
Mm,
I think it's something that people resonate with at
mm,
scale because we lack so much of it in what we're doing today.
yeah.
Any thoughts about how we can, bring the joy back? Yeah, some people talk about bringing something else back. Let's bring
Yeah.
joy back.
I think it goes to that old, I don't know what you call it, statement, aphorism or something, but it smile and the world smiles with you. Cry and you cry alone. Or is it laugh and the world laughs with you? But it's real. We vibrate off of each other's emotions and feelings. And if
Mhm.
I'm excited about something, other people get excited about it. And I'm excited. I'm like this is like amazing to me.
Yeah,
It's incredible. I
yeah.
the universe inspires itself, and so a lot of times I tell you what's really interesting. So there's a lot of talk about diversity and these sort of things, right? And they're like, oh,
Mm.
people need to see themselves. And the way I see it is like I know a lot of African American astrophysicists and physicists. And for the most part, the person that inspired us to it, like for me, it was Albert Einstein,
Yeah.
was completely different from ourselves. For some
Mhm.
people, it might be Isaac Newton, for some people, it might be Galileo. But when it comes to actually surviving in the field, having a mentor that's similar to yourself makes all the difference because they
Mm.
understand exactly what your specific needs and challenges are, right? And so
Mhm.
that type of mentoring is necessary, but the inspiration is, I feel like it's the universe itself, and I'm just a vessel that I've been able to see it this way. Let me share with you this cool thing this is so cool. Let me tell you about it, right? That's how I feel about it.
That's beautiful. And I won't make another flub, but I'll ask you about the Black Physicists Society. I think you
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
role there.
Right,
That's
right.
right.
Yes, yes. So I'm the president of the National Society of
That's
Black
right.
Physicists.
That's right.
And to my surprise, I've been in the news a lot lately, since December. Whenever that's mentioned, there's a lot of people in the comments that are like, what the hell is wrong with America? The National Society, and they change the word of to for Black physicists. Why do they need that? And then someone else goes and says, well, if you look, there's also a National Society of Hispanic Physicists. There's women in physics. And they're like, why do Americans do that? Divide themselves into these groups. And the answer is because at a time it was necessary, right? It
Mhm.
was necessary.
Mhm.
It's not an exclusionary organization. It's an
Mhm.
organization that's meant to help people. Because here's the thing that I think that people uh is a hidden reality. When you look at professions, especially a lot of those that sort of have an elitism about it,
Mhm.
there is a generational component. When I got to my research group at Stanford University as a graduate student, three of the guys in my research group, their fathers were PhD physicists. Not
Mhm.
average PhD physicists, but high accomplishing PhD physicists. My father, by contrast, dropped out of school when he was 9 years old, right?
Mhm.
So in my mind, they cheated. you know, and so what does that mean? That means that if you're going to compete, if I'm going to compete with these people, I need people who are going to say, "Hey, man, let me help you out
Mhm.
a little bit." So one of those guys for me was Craig DeForest. His ancestor was Lee DeForest, right? Lee DeForest was the inventor, I think, of the Vidicon tube, which was a vacuum tubes that led to transistors, right? So Craig kind of took me under his physics wing in graduate school, and another one was this guy David Santiago, who's now the head of quantum computing at Berkeley. And
Mhm.
David, he got it because there was a physicist from the Ivy League who decided that instead of going the normal physics route, because he liked to fish and he liked rum, he was going to go to Puerto Rico. And, so he could live the life he wanted to live. And he
Mhm.
meets this young guy who's so good at mathematics. He's like, dude, you are so good at this, but you will never be competitive with the education you're getting here. So let me take you under my wing and I will teach you how to do physics at the top level. And when this dude
Mhm.
showed up for graduate school, he wasn't from Princeton, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, Landau Institute, and in these places. He was from the University of Puerto Rico. But we all
Mhm.
recognize that he was the best among us because
Yeah.
he had that pedigree of being trained by someone who was already highly trained at it,
Mm.
right? It's like having, it's funny because Michael Jordan's son wasn't so successful at basketball. But if you look at NBA today, a lot of the top players, their fathers were professional basketball players, right? Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry. There's groups of brothers in the
Mhm.
NBA.
Mhm.
I forgot what the original question was. Oh, the National Society of Black Physicists. So if you look at the African American population, the
Yeah.
first African American astronomers, one of whom was my PhD advisor, right? We're talking like the 1960s, right? That's not,
Mhm.
and so you basically are looking at a population of people for whom there are no internal mentors. So when you get recognized as being talented and you start off in the field, you're not on an equal footing with everyone else. You're intellectually equal, but you're not knowledge equal. You're not trained equal. So you need this sort of like assistance that could help you to achieve your true optimal uh
Potential.
outcome and potential. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
thing about that is that it continues as you get older, So I'm
Mhm.
always partnering, like here at Princeton is Dave McCamus, right? When I was doing the stuff with the light
Yeah.
curves, it's Jelko Ivezic, right? When I'm doing detectors, it's Armin Karcher and Michael Levy and Natalie
Yeah.
Rowe, right? None of these people are black people. You know what I mean? They don't, but there are people that took me under their wing because they recognize, dude, you have the potential. Now we got to give you that deep training and that
Mhm.
that we have, because the thing about the stuff that we do, you really learn it from doing it over and over and over and over and over again. Nobody with a bachelor's degree in physics is even close to being a physicist, right? When you graduate with your PhD in physics, for the next 7 years, you're considered a junior physicist. So, given the fact that people get their PhDs at 30, you're like 40 before you consider regular. Okay, so it's very subtle, it's very deep, and no one does it alone. And so if
Mhm.
you have been alone all your life, chances are, having an affinity group to
Of
help you
course.
and
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
understand you exactly what you need is very valuable.
Absolutely. And I've been thinking, you're often interviewed in the media
Yeah.
as a beacon of inspiration. And I
Mhm.
think with that comes grave responsibility and a little bit of pressure, I would imagine, in
Yeah.
terms of, there's a whole generation of young people, every age, looking up, and I wonder what that experience is like. I think you've spoken at depth about your uh,
Right. Right.
origin story, and
Yeah.
I wonder how you envision your future story.
Yeah. So, the origin story ends at the turn of the century. Then there's a story of what's happened since then. And one of the things
Mhm.
that happened is I started working in Africa. And the guy who got me engaged, his name is Kevin Hand. He was a graduate student at the time. Now he's at Jet Propulsion Laboratory and he's a senior scientist, right? He works on planetary science and he's involved with the Europa lander mission somehow.
Mhm.
But anyway, um, the organization that him and a guy named Will Marshall founded was called Cosmos Education. And
Mhm.
it had as its motto, engage, inspire, empower. So my interviews, me showing up to speak, these were all engagements. And I inspire in these engagements. But where I am of service to people is not just the inspiration, but the empowerment,
Mhm.
right? And so I feel like that type of education that you need. I'm getting a lot of feedback from somewhere. Is it possible to turn down somebody's microphone somewhere or speaker somewhere? It's kind of disrupting my thought. Okay, I'm good. So, how do I do the empower part? So, if you look in America, we have been promoting STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, really hard for a quarter of a century. But yet, only 18% of our college graduates are in STEM fields. And if you break that down to the really hard science ones like physics, that's a tiny, tiny fraction of every university. Nobody is doing this stuff, right? Nobody's interested. It doesn't matter what background you're from. It's it's a tiny group. When people go to college, they ask themselves three questions: What do I enjoy? What can I make money doing? And what has the least amount of mathematics, right? And that mathematics barrier is the sticking point, right? We are all convinced that we can't do it. And we're really, um, it's a disinformation in our education system that introduces that to us because we're all made to think that math is about numbers. And then you get to be like 14, 15, and they start giving you things like E equals MC square. And you're like, hey, where'd all the numbers go? you know, F equals MA, and it gets way more complicated. Those are the simplest ones. So, what I see in the future is how can I continue to inspire and empower? And one of the things is a formal. I'm looking for partners to I've kind of cracked the math code in terms of how do you take a person. We're all taught traditional math, but I think that we have to be taught a fundamental foundation of STEM math that we don't have. And so I've tested these techniques over the last 20 years. And so using my techniques, I'm going to make the bold claim that the average 11-year-old can be as mathematically sophisticated routinely as a college level STEM major at the end of their sophomore year.
I believe it and I love it. And that's why at HoloArt, we're rolling out the stream education that we've been chatting about in the
Right,
background,
right,
where
right.
we also add art as a piece. And I don't know if you saw the article that came out earlier this week about the college dropout, who went on to he left to go study poetry or to become a poet and won the Fields Medal.
Oh,
And I think,
wow.
yeah, I'll
How do you
send
do
you.
that?
Well, I think,
If you've
many
left, how do you
people.
win it after you've left?
I think what it gets to for me is the link between polymathic
Mm,
disciplines that we
mm,
used to teach and the purpose of
mm.
education, where it was
Yeah,
teleologically as a pursuit of enlightenment. Whereas
yeah,
now what we're doing is, vocational
yeah,
factory
exactly.
of,
Yep,
what's
yeah,
your
yeah.
pedigree?
Right,
And where
right.
will you end up, and
Yeah,
what corporate ladder will you engage in? And I think
that's right.
part of breaking that mold, the disruption in
Yeah,
education, is related to the
yeah.
democratization of information, which I
Right.
think is what you're engaging in, and
Exactly.
also
Yeah.
Hollow Art.
Mhm.
And also, I think re-engaging young people in the wonders and the mysteries of it's so wonderful beyond the screen, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
It
whole
is.
world out there.
Believe it or not, right?
Yeah. And
It's
I
almost
wonder,
like the real world has become the virtual world, and the virtual world is the
right?
real world. Yeah.
Have you seen those VR glasses that are the latest tech? It's like
Not the
they're
late.
just
I have Oculus, not the new one that Apple has come out with. I've not seen
I
that
was
yet.
gonna make a little joke
Yeah.
because I know you're into stand-up comedy. This wasn't
Yeah.
quite as funny, but it was like, these glasses that are like, you know, look at look, this is VR.
Right.
This is
Oh, you
real.
mean not the Oculus systems, but it just
I'm
looks
not
like
talking.
glasses.
Well, it was just they have these VR glasses and
Oh
they
wow.
have nothing in them, and they tell
Yeah.
you to go out into nature and you'll see things.
Oh
It's crazy.
yeah.
Yeah. You know,
I know. Yeah. But
so
I had the most amazing childhood in that way because,
mm,
because of the background that you were speaking about. My mom wanted me to be safe. And so at the age of 14, she moved me into the deep woods of Mississippi. And, there was no TV, right? Internet did not yet exist. So you actually went outdoors and interacted with nature. And I'm telling you, man, being like a 12-year-old kid I kind of went left, and then went there full time. So I showed Mississippi at 9, showed Mississippi at 11, and then was permanent from the age of 13. But, I would spend my days like attempting to dam the creek behind the house, right? Swinging on vines, or following the creek down its path. And it was a time where your parents are like, get out the house, bye, get out of here, and they don't see you again until nighttime. And in the meantime, you're out doing who knows whatever. But it was exploration and it was interaction with the actual real world of nature.
absolutely. And there was another thing going around recently about the different parenting cultures.
Oh
And
yeah,
so the coddling and the over sheltering, and
yeah,
there's different
yeah,
philosophies, different
right.
practices. I think what we're seeing, you and I both agree on this, is a need for us to re-engage um, with children
Mm,
and the sciences and math,
yeah,
as you say, with a sense of
yeah,
fun and wonder. And you had Bill Nye, the Science Guy,
yeah,
write a little piece about your book. You're currently
yeah,
involved with your children's education,
yeah, yeah.
and you just, I mean, what might you share with people listening today in terms of bringing fun back into the equation? So E equals MC squared, um, to the power of,
Yeah, yeah.
better not say anything in
You know,
front of
there,
you.
the thing about
Power of fun.
education is that I feel like education needs to be customized for the individual. And that's one of the difficulties. If you're in some city with a high population density, you're going to get a bunch of kids in. They're going to be coming from various perspectives, various backgrounds. And what matters a lot is what's happening in your own house, what the conversation is. So, like I say, when you mentioned that I'm engaged with my son, he just graduated high school a couple of weeks back, and I homeschooled him up to the age of 10. All right. And so when he gets to middle school, he comes home and he says to me one day, Dad, in math class at school, I feel like a god among peasants. And I was like, see, that's your problem, that's hubris. You can't, you're well educated now, but you got to continue to work hard. Or else they're going to catch you, right? But the point of it is that because of my own education, I had a particular knowledge that I could bestow on him. So the irony is, my mother said to me one day when he was very young, right, 4 or 5 or something, she goes, I think he's smarter than you are. And I said to her, no, the hell he ain't. His dad got a PhD in physics. My mom and dad, neither one of y'all graduated high school. The conversation in the home education that you're getting varies based on what the parents know, right? And so, of course, parents are going to teach their kids what they know so they can survive. But in the world where I'm from, like I show up at Stanford University, I'm way undereducated than everybody else in, say, mathematics, higher level mathematics. But I bet I'm the best at skinning a squirrel. I know how to process an armadillo better than anyone else up in here. I know how to plant the different crops and what it takes. It's just a different knowledge for survival. And the other thing is I was in a tough world. So I knew how to be tough and deal with tough people, right? And whereas they were kind of soft. Okay. So you know, the thing is that the world that we've evolved into, and that's the thing about human society, is that it's an evolving system. The technology changes, morality changes, the population density changes. So what is the formula for you being the best human being in total, as well as being able to survive and thrive in the environment that you're in, but also having the flexibility that you know how to learn, you know how to pick up what you need to pick up, so that when things change in the future, you can change with them and adapt to them, right? That's the challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wanted to echo that sentiment by saying that, you know, what we've done is essentially designed a society where we're taking away independence in some
Mhm.
ways from younger generations. And
Yeah.
I speak about this often because I love the book A Woman Always Makes a Plan by Mae Musk. And she
Mhm.
talks about sending Elon to, you know, from South Africa to Toronto on his own at 12.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that would be absurd for somebody, a mother potentially today.
Right.
And then you
Yeah.
think about the
Yeah.
children in Japan who are,
Yeah.
you know, socialized to go and run errands at a young age.
Right.
We don't do that anymore, and you see this
No.
mass exodus of people leaving,
Yeah.
and we've chatted about this,
Yeah.
you know, urban centers because of the
Right.
safety. So it becomes a larger, it's
Mhm.
a complex adaptive system. It's a
Yeah.
larger complex
Right.
question.
Yeah.
And we look up to the stars with amazement. We look down to our families with love and
Yeah.
potential other sentiments. And, you know,
Yeah.
I
Love and
wonder
annoyance.
minor annoyance, absolutely. What would be, you know, I am gonna butcher his name, Archimedes is what I like to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
that lever of, like,
Right.
what would be the lever that you, based on your vantage point of
Right.
having worked and, you know, um, orbited all of these different,
Right.
systems,
Yeah.
what would you say would help not just, you know, um one child, and I love what you said about customization. I wonder if, you
Yeah.
know, AI could help. That's a
Right.
footnote.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would be the lever to help shift the conversation at scale so that we can
Mhm.
start looking at
Mhm.
stream education,
Mhm.
art and science,
Mhm.
math and technology, engineering, imagination. The cultivation of imagination is directly linked to innovation.
Mhm. So let
It's a
me ask
win-win.
you this. So I'm familiar with STEM and STEAM. What's
Yeah.
the R in stream?
That's a great question. So R is typically used for reading. Some people use it
Oh.
for recreation. So
Ah.
reading, you have to be able to read to be able to get to the other stuff. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people are, well, there's studies
I
that have been
I'd
that
say,
attention spans. We can't
yeah.
focus.
I'd say resilience. So
Ah,
there's a lot, there's a minority of people who are well educated. It's typically from parents who are well educated. I like to
mhm.
say that, and again, education varies. It depends on what you want to do. It's not always university education, right? It's, you know,
Of
like I come
course.
from
Of course.
skilled manual laborers, right? Trade
Yes.
type people, right?
Yes.
Um, so I kind of lost my train of thought. Where were we? Oh, resilience.
Just
Yeah,
you
yeah.
were
So
resilience and stream and what the lever would be.
when you are going into an area where you say, okay, I recognize the opportunity, like for example, you're from an undereducated, impoverished group of people, and you're like, oh, education is the key to get me out of this. You're going to
Mhm.
encounter tough times, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be perhaps a social rejection you might have to deal with, right? Because people like to hierarchy themselves, and whatever we can find, we're going to use that to elevate ourselves amongst the next person, right? So if you're a woman, they'll say something womanish. If you're a minority of racial or ethnically, they'll go there, right? So don't be so freaking soft. Like, you know, I like to you know, if what is standing in between me being where I am and reaching my goal is people saying mean things to me, that's very different than people punching me in the face or people stabbing me with spears or taking me out back and putting me in a cage, right? It's like Chris Rock, who I like to call my, you know, Chris Rock the comedian. I like to refer to him as my favorite American philosopher. You know, he had this set where he was talking about how, you know, black men in New York complain about how they can't get a cab, right? He was like, dude, back in the day, your ass would have been the cab. A white man just jump on your back, like, let's go, right? You know, so, you know, so it's levels to it. You know what I mean? And so what I'm seeing right now is there's a lot of grievance. A lot of people have voices that didn't have voices before. and there's a lot of grievance that people are expressing. But because I'm in this academic environment, I actually see people quitting, right, and leaving their path because of the culture. And like, you have to deal with your own mind. But if you're serious about this goal, I mean, think about what humans had to go through to get places, right? Oh, I want to make it to the top of Mount Everest. I want to make it to the South Pole. You know, you got to deal with things that's way more difficult than people saying mean things to you. And so I see a lot of, I feel like we're doing a lot of, it's true. In order for something to thrive, the better the environment for them to thrive, better. It's better if people are not being mean to you. But I'm not so convinced about that, because that does make you tougher and harder. But but at the same time, you have a responsibility to be resilient. So I don't see a lot of building resilience training going into the training manifestation.
Fair. I like that. At the same time, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on it before
Yeah.
we move back to space, because I'm
Yeah.
itching to get
All
back
right. All
there
right. Let's do it.
too.
Let's do it.
Yeah. The piece around resilience. So part
Yeah.
of what I find really fatiguing is
Mhm.
resilience, resilience, resilience.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
where resilience is enough, you know.
Yeah.
There's a goal and
Well, if
there's
you're
system.
being fatigued, Miriam, stop being so damn soft and still take care of business, even though you fatigued, right?
Oh, I just got schooled. All right, all right. And I wore my leather jacket just to give off
All
that,
right.
like, anyway. All right. So back to space. Let me go on mute for a second. Let me absorb that. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, no, it's
Listen,
okay. I
you
needed
know
to
how
hear
many
that,
times
but I
I've
think
been punched in the face? You know how many times I've been at gunpoint? You know how much meanness I've
oh,
experienced?
I know, I know, I
Keep
know.
it moving.
Your book is gripping. I can't wait for
Yeah.
the second one. What I'm talking about though is what I find fatiguing is having resilience be a cop out. You're just not
Mm,
hard enough.
yeah.
Resilient. It's not just that, because that puts
You're
the
right.
onus on the individual versus the
But they do
collective.
have an onus on them. Look, you are the architect of your story. You are writing your story. If nobody's paving the way
Oh,
for you, fucking get a hammer, break up some rocks, and pave your own way. Right? Like,
I'm gonna put a kid control on this video now, Hakeem. I put it
oh
as
my
kid
God,
friendly.
did I say a
That's
bad word?
okay. That's okay. You
No, no,
said
no,
duck,
no.
didn't you? You said
Duck.
duck.
Yeah, yeah. I said
Yeah.
duck. I'm out
But
of luck.
I beg to differ. I see what you're saying. I agree with you. At the same time, I think you're paving the way. I think you're making it easier. I think you taking on the role of president with the Society for Black Physicists
Yeah,
is a way that you're kind of moving into that direction. And I agree with you in terms of not having these smaller identities, but there is a need for some sort of affinity.
yeah,
And I think part of what we're talking about is scientific. So if we
yeah.
bring biomimicry back into it and we
Mm.
bring, um, I don't even want to talk about science and technical terms with you because I know you'll put me in my place, but you've got these
No,
like,
I'll
you've
just
got
tease you.
I know you've got these things and
Yeah.
they attract each other. And I think part of it is we
Mm.
see people in the same way. And so part of our architecture, the design of the schools, the gated communities, the governance systems that we
Yeah,
have, if we're able to create more of a Renaissance-esque Florentine square where you have people of different, backgrounds,
yeah.
of different, perspectives who can come in and engage instead of the polarity that we're
Right.
seeing in the
Yeah,
world today.
yeah.
That's
Right.
where I see the opportunity for that
Mm.
lever and that catalyst for people to be able to, come up with a new substance.
If I could get anything out of the human psyche, it would be tribalism and this hierarchy crap. So I've been to now, almost 4 dozen countries around the world.
Mm,
And, I like to mix it up with the locals. And what I see is that in every country, there is an identity hierarchy that
yeah.
exists, but it's different from one country to another. It's the same way that religion varies more strongly by geography than anything else. Like in one country, I'm up here. The next country, I'm there. Next country, I'm there. And it's like, okay, that means it's completely arbitrary. It's completely made up. And so whatever the thing that I see about us, we're individually brilliant, but together, we're greater than the sum of the parts. right? And I always say that if humans were trusting and trustworthy, well-behaved, we'd be Star Trek tomorrow, right? But we're not. And that's the problem. That's why I talk about resilience, because yeah, it would be great if everybody behaved, but they're not, they don't, right? That's the thing. They don't. We're not, you know, you know, I look at being a civilized person as meaning that I do not every day respond as my animal instincts tell me to. I use rational thought and understand I'm in a social system, and I try to optimize my behavior for me and those around me having the best outcome within the system that we live, not just, you know, hey, hit you on the head with my club, right? You know, it's, you know, and so when I was a young student, or I say a young student, I was an old student, but I was younger than I am now, right? So when I was a graduate student and I got to the
It's
point,
relative.
it's all relative, right? When I got to the point of being an advanced graduate student and people were asking me to come around and speak to other students, how do, in the world of physics at the elite levels, the way that people fail generally comes out of a judgment about you, right? About where you are mentally, intellectually, creatively. And what happens is they, you know, people sort of, you become ostracized, right? And you feel so bad, you quit. But it's not that you're not creative. It's not that you're not intelligent. It's just that you haven't grown to your optimal intelligence and creativity yet, right? And if you have the right mindset and the right work ethic, you know, you wouldn't even be here if you didn't have the fundamentals of creativity and intelligence, right? So people are misjudging you because they want to find someone to look down on, right? And so what I would advise these students for their resilience, I would say this to everybody: don't quit, let them kick you out, because that never happens. They never kick you out. And then what happens? You end up getting that PhD. And so I ask students, I asked them, I say, hey, have you ever been to the doctor? And everybody's like, yeah. And I say, okay, what was your doctor's grade point average? How old were they when they got their MD degree? It doesn't matter, right? Because once you have it, you're now in a completely different state. So what's going to prevent you from doing that? The difference in Hakeem, like, I'll give you another example. I was talking to the former president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. His name is Freeman Rabowski. And he said to me, he goes, Hakeem, what do you think is the number one demographic characteristic of students' parents that correlates most strongly with that student declaring a STEM degree and actually completing it? All right. And I said, oh, that's easy. Parental income. And he goes, nope. And I'm like, oh, okay. Education level of the parents. And he's like, no. And I'm like, whether or not the parents have STEM degrees. He's like, again, no. I'm like, okay, well, what is it? And his answer was whether or not the parents were born in America. If they were not, the student would persist and complete that STEM degree. So I was aware of this. I called it immigrant hustle, right? And so coming from Mississippi, going to the San Francisco Bay Area, I had immigrant hustle. So what is immigrant hustle? Immigrant hustle is about the consequences of you failing, right? I was, you know, a year before I stood up on Stanford's campus, I was face down on the ground with police in a drug bust, right? This is like literally a year to the date before I'm there, okay? So I'm looking, if I don't make this work, where am I, right? If you go 2 years before that, where was I? I was a janitor who was a college dropout, and I attempted to move up to bellhop. And when I couldn't move up to bellhop, I was like, I'm going back to college. So if the college thing don't work out, I'm going back to being the janitor that couldn't move up to bellhop, right? I'm back to $4 an hour. So people that come to the West from parts of the country where they don't have the same opportunity, they see the opportunity and they refuse to let people's meanness or whatever stop them from their goal, because what they have to go through is not as dire as what they will have to go through if they don't make this work, right? But if you're comfortable, which we tend to be in the Western world, right, then you might not have that drive to complete what you started just because times get tough.
Absolutely, and I think I love that phrase, "immigrant hustle," and I think everybody has it depending on their frame of reference, right?
Yeah,
Because
depending on your
depending
frame
on
of
where
reference. Yeah. I'll tell you what's funny. When I got to Stanford, I was like, yeah. y'all might be better educated than me, but can't nobody outwork me, right? And I was known for how hard I worked. And so when I go to Silicon Valley, I didn't know anything about chip manufacturing. I knew about plasmas. All right. And so I go there and I'm thinking I'm going to use the same formula. Oh, yeah, I'm going to outwork everybody. So here I am showing up Saturday night at 10 p.m. to work in the lab. Guess who's else there? The Chinese, the Indians, the Koreans. I'm like, damn, they're on my game. They figured
Oh
me
yeah,
out.
I mean, really, what we're seeing now with artificial intelligence as well is, I think, a dumbing down of the population. And when we
Mm,
think about the, trust fund mentality of people who
mm,
don't have to necessarily work as hard, I think we see these hierarchies. I wanted
yeah,
to jump into quantum physics and
yeah.
quantum realms and quantum fields, but I'm going to linger here for just a little bit to talk about your incredible stratospheric kind of,
Mm.
you're just um, do you want to share a little bit about Nat Geo and your other interviews and
Okay.
other things that I don't know
Things
if
I
you
have
want me to?
going on. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So one of the things that happened with me is I've always been a performer. I've always been a arts in this theme thing. So it was music and dance in my youth. And at the end of the 90s, I started getting into acting. In particular, I started doing voice acting. And then, shortly thereafter, I became sort of people noticed that when I explained science stuff, it was kind of entertaining. And it wasn't anything on purpose. It's just that, if I'm trying to get something across, the way I go about it is I want to make it visual for you. So I act things out, but it's not, it's just sort of an innate way of going about it, right? Uh, and then I get serious about it and I take acting classes, right? And I take voice acting classes. And so ultimately I get a call to be a science advisor to Discovery. And they're like, yo, we should put you on TV. And it sort of like takes off for me in that way. And so now I do as much media stuff as anything in education and science, right? Entertainment stuff. So um so I've been, PBS, National Geographic, Discovery, Netflix. I do a lot of newscasting. So coming projects, uh there is a Roddenberry Entertainment who created Star Trek. They have partnered with online platform called I can't talk about that yet. Never mind. We're launching it at Comic-Con at the end of July, but it's a new podcast. So there's a corporate thing that's going on, and it's being announced at Comic-Con at the end of July, July 20th. And the first project under this is a podcast with me and an amazing woman named Tamara Krinsky. She's sort of like the pop culture expert. I'm the science expert. And so what we will do is we basically discuss technologies that exist in science fiction franchises, right? Like take, for example, Men in Black. They have a little thing called a neuralizer, right? So the question is, could that really work in the real world? And I discussed the technology of it, and the brain science and this sort
Love
of
it,
thing.
love it, love
Yeah.
it. That's going to be
Um,
gripping.
yes, and then in November, I'm taping a new series for Nat Geo with a major comedian who I'm not going to name, and it's basically taking that comedian on a journey of self-discovery through the universe and their interaction with the universe is what I'm going to be doing. Yeah. Um, and then of course I'm always on How the Universe Works, which is on Discovery and I think for some reason it's on Paramount Plus. And on Netflix you can find me on Bacon Impossible. Excuse me. Then there's other projects. I got a new book I'm completing right now. Um, that I'm not going to get into the title, but it's a pretty cool science book. I got it half written, and when I say half written, I don't mean in
Can't
draft
wait.
form. I mean in
Yeah.
clean
Hmm.
finished form. And so the next, I hope to get that done by the end of the summer, and submit it sometime in August. Yeah, and
That's awesome. I absolutely love your energy and what
oh,
you
and I
share
have a
with us.
movie deal for the. I
Yeah,
have a
I was
movie
waiting.
deal, yeah,
Yeah.
for the memoir. So it's the second movie deal for the same book. So the first movie deal was in collaboration with Working Title, which is a movie production company that makes a lot of the movies that you know. And Chadwick Boseman, the late Chadwick Boseman, had a production company, and we got a deal from a major studio. But after he passed, the studio decided that, without Chad, they didn't want to move forward with that deal. So we went back out, and now the deal is, again, two production companies. One of them is Oprah and Harpo Productions, and the other is Tribeca, which is De Niro's company.
Mm.
So the first option ended in April, and they re-signed the option, which is a really good sign, just this past April. So that's in the works as well.
That's very exciting, and we're excited to collaborate with you on some exciting projects. On exciting, so many synonyms, adjectives.
Yeah.
I think there's one person who gets me spinning, and that's when I engage with you, because there's just so much to talk about, from jazz
Yeah.
to space to pop culture. I love it, and I'd like to link it to
Yeah.
two things. One is, at some point, we said we're going to do some music jam stand-up
Mm.
comedy piece, and it's going to
Yeah.
be invite only,
Yeah.
and no holds barred, so you can
That's
say
right.
whatever
So I can be myself.
that's right. And that's, I think, what we need, to be able to let loose a little bit
Yeah.
in terms of rediscovering what it is to be uncensored
Yeah.
humans.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the other one is, which you talked about hierarchies. I'd
Yeah.
like to talk about hierarchies in the quantum field, because
Mm.
some of the explorations at the edges of the cosmos, which is how I
Mm.
tease this talk, and I feel remiss, I would be remiss if I don't talk a little bit about space. Is,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
when we're looking at the topologies and taxonomies, and we had the pleasure of having Dr. Matthew Greenhouse
Mm.
launch Hollow with a talk about
Oh,
James
nice.
Webb, and we didn't even talk
Yeah.
about your work with James Webb. So,
Right. Right.
I mean, we can go a little bit over if you're okay. I've
Yeah.
gotten the okay from Web3, and I'd
Okay.
love
All
to
right.
hear
But 2:15, I got to be out. I got 10
that's
minutes
what
left.
we have.
All
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Then
All right.
the floor is yours.
So what do you
Whatever.
want? What do you? I didn't hear the question. What was it?
It was open-ended. It was for you to take
Mm.
off wherever you want to go. I think one is, you worked really hard on uh, James Webb.
Right.
That
Right.
that whole controversy. We don't have to go
Right.
into it, because
Right. Right.
that'll take us down a tangent. I just want to
Yeah. Yeah.
acknowledge the
Yeah.
work that you've done, and
Right.
say, how resilient it was
Yeah.
of you
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
push through and get that through. And
Hey,
bravo.
well, listen, bullies will, they got the wrong one when they try to bully me. They'll figure out that triggers me to push back even harder. Right.
Yeah,
I'm of that personality where, even coming up, the most motivational thing for me is for somebody to say, "Oh, I don't think you can," or "I don't
yeah.
think you're the one." My mind goes straight to, "I will show you."
I will
Um,
show you.
yeah. So
Reverse psychology works then.
that's the thing. Once I became a mentor myself, I realized that not everybody thought the way I do. Some people need encouragement. Some people need a kick in the butt. And the trick is to figure out which is which, right? How do I could
Spirit of the
discourage
same.
you, or I could, yeah.
Sure.
Uh, but
So
accountability has to be there.
absolutely. And I think our viewers can take a look at your work on James Webb, because it's just so exhaustive, and we're limited on
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Would we
yeah,
maybe be able to end with some of your thoughts about the edges of our universe and our cosmos? Are we expanding? Are we contracting? How
yeah,
does,
yeah,
dark matter, dark energy factor in? What do we not know, and how much can we hope to learn? And what drives you? I mean, that was like
yeah.
100 questions
Well,
in
you know
one.
what? So I have always felt somewhat like an outsider in the world of physics, and because of that, I can address certain questions without concern for what other people are going to think about me. Because I'm always like, yeah, think negative of me anyway. What the hell? I'll just do whatever I want to do, right? Um, and so I feel like we've reached a point where, and this is basically where my new book is going, where there are certain questions and certain thoughts that we just avoided as physicists because they didn't seem like very physical questions, so let's leave that to the mystics. Let's leave that to the to people of faith and philosophers, right? But I think we're at a point now where we can start to, we know enough about the physical world that we can address these questions from the physical perspective. Big questions like, why does our universe exist, right? Is there some bigger purpose? What is the overall, if you look at the laws of physics, some of them look like the universe is attempting to fulfill a purpose. Like, for example, I give you two. the motion of light and the motion of matter. At the most fundamental, when light moves from point A to point B, it does so consistent with what is known as the principle of least time. It minimizes the time it takes for the light to travel from one point to the other. So the question is, how the hell does the light know? All right. And the same thing comes up in the motion of matter. It satisfies what is known as the principle of least action. So action is this physical quantity that has units of energy times time. All right. But the question is, how does the matter know which path between these 2 points is the one that minimizes the action? So you have someone like Richard Feynman who comes up with what we call the path integral formulation for quantum mechanics. And it's basically like, oh, well, basically what happens is the matter actually takes every possible path between the 2 points. All right. And each path has a probability assigned to it. And the one that we see manifested is the one that has the highest probability. But these other paths are also taken, but we just don't ever, they're so rare that you don't see them. And so people began to do experiments on this. And in the early 90s, in the 90s, people began to see these effects where, wow, this weird path of small probability, we observed it happening, right? It's not just the standard path that you get out. So there are these deeper levels to the universe that are, not so obvious. If things move to fulfill a purpose, to minimize energy, to minimize or minimize the time, minimize the action, then what other higher purposes could the universe be fulfilling in its evolution as it's going about its thing, right? And then if you think about that, you can ask yourself, well, what role does life and intelligence play in that, right? Why do we exist? Why does our intelligence exist? Why does mind exist? So whatever it is, clearly it's not a high priority for the universe because, matter, the dark sector, dark energy, dark matter make up 95% of all that exists. Then you have the 5% that is normal matter. And what percentage of that ends up in life? It's like the residue of the residue of the residue, right? Planets are the residue that's left over after star formation. And then life is like this slime on this one planet out of the 39 or so gravitationally rounded bodies in our solar system, right? So, we can think these thoughts, but they don't seem to lead to the purpose of the universe to create us, right? It doesn't seem to be, but yet here we are, and we're clearly special. So what is our purpose?
It's a great way to, end our session today with what is our purpose. And from your book, I keep thinking back to that section you had about being thrust on the stage to give a sermon.
Yeah. Yeah. Good old
And I
Reverend
wonder,
Cherry.
well, if you'd like to close us out with a, 1 minute, 2 minute sermon, it doesn't have to be
I don't
Ezekiel,
have a
but
sermon. I don't have a sermon ready. Yeah. I mean, I just feel that we are the people who come to think about. Once you get older in life, you can begin to curate the humans that surround you, right? You're not thrown into class and this sort of thing. And I like to curate the humans around me to be positive, constructive, productive people, right? And that's kind of, it's like, I don't engage in fights and debates and things that are to no purpose, right? And I think that getting that sort of noise that serves as grits in the gears of, a lot of people, listen, it's different strokes for different folks. Some people would love to go back to being hunter gatherers, right? I'm a progress focused person, right? And other people are like, yo, let's go backwards, which is hard given, after all these centuries of domestication that we've been through, so yeah, it's different strokes for different folks, but I think as long as you're positive, as long as you're constructive and productive and contributing in a positive way, then, as human beings, we can, create the lives for each other individually, because we are the architects of the world that we live in, right? And it's always a battle between positive and negative forces. And if you look at a place like Twitter, everybody complaining, right? A lot of grievance about the world, and it's toxic, right? It's toxic in there. You look at the world of pictures, and everybody's like, "Hey, look at my great body," And it was like, it's like, what, humans, love them, hate them, we're all over the place. And it's wonderful.
Absolutely. And I love it because I will not compliment your mind. I will compliment your physique.
Yeah, as long as it's clothed, it can give off a
It's been a
like a trick.
joy chatting
Thank
with
you.
you as always, and looking forward to future collaborations. It's going to be
Sounds good.
fun.
Look, love to
Yeah.
hang out again, and drinks are on you. All right.
Have a good one. Take
All right.
care.
Thank you so much, HoloArt community. It was good to have you suffer through my ideas. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hakeem. We'll chat again soon.
All right. Bye bye.